All right. Hello again, everyone. We're so excited to have you here. I want to welcome you to Flatiron School's Coding for Beginners Intro to APIs using JavaScript. My name is Catherine Sommerfeld. I'm the Director of Marketing Campaigns and Events here at Flatiron School. Part of my team's job is hosting free introductory workshops like this evening's event to give you the opportunity to meet some of our instructors and get a better feel of the Flatiron School experience. Again, as a quick reminder, we'll be using the chat as our main source of communication, so make sure to set that little blue button from host and panelists to everyone. If you have questions, feel free to direct them to me. I will answer as best I can, or I will pass them over to Demetrio when I don't have the technical knowledge to answer them for you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host for the evening, Demetrio Lima. He's one of our lead software engineering instructors. Take it away, Demetrio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitri Lima. I'm a lead software engineer for the Flex program here at Flatiron. If you're thinking of applying, you might find me as one of your instructors in the near future. So just to kind of give you a quick brief kind of intro about what we're doing here today, we're going to be talking about APIs. We're going to be talking about how they work, and we're going to kind of do a little bit of demo about what we're doing here. Catherine will be sharing any of the information that's available here today with you after the session. She'll have a recording for you after the session, so no need to worry. If you lose track of something here, always ask a question or always go forward and, remember that you'll have a recording here to go ahead and help you find exactly where you got lost. Without further ado, I'm just going to start up my share screen so that I can demonstrate to you, a little intro here. So let's talk about APIs. For those of you in the know about APIs and a little bit of JavaScript here, APIs stand for application. Sorry, I'm kind of like jumping the gun a little bit. I'm a little nervous, so I apologize. APIs are kind of like a little bit of a program. Sorry. Wow. They're an application protocol interface, basically. What that kind of amounts to, that acronym, is just that we utilize this information coming from other applications to help dictate just how ours is going to run, how it's going to view, and how we can get data from one website to another so that we can kind of eventually demonstrate it into the way that we want to. So our agenda here today, like I mentioned, is that we're going to be, why are you not going next? There we go. We're going to be having a discussion about the APIs. We're going to kind of go through what a request and response cycle looks like. We're going to be, seeing what is an API. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of it. We're going to talk about fetch, how to utilize that method within JavaScript, how to get that working for yourself when you hit a button, when you hit, when you first load up the page, just to kind of see when we do that. We're going to be building a fact generator together here today, where I'll be kind of pressing on a button. It'll give us a random fact, maybe multiple random facts, depending on how we choose to show it. And we're going to manipulate all that information, like I said, on the DOM, get it viewing so that we're just fully aware of what we're going. Now, just so that everyone's aware, the key things that you need to know a little bit while we're going on is just like about functions, how they work. You want to know a little bit already about how a fetch works, maybe. If you don't, I can kind of go over that here today. And you kind of want to just know that the DOM is kind of the actual interface that we're using and working with while we're going through here. So like I mentioned before, the acronym for API stands for Application Programming Interface. And essentially what we're doing with that is we're making a request of data from a server. Now, at first, when you think about this kind of concept, think of how you go to a restaurant, you see a menu full of different items, different things that are available, options of stuff that you want to get, you want to modify so that it's all, directly related to you. One neat thing that APIs allow for us to do is make that request. And if the server has it in the back with the kitchen, where it's all at the database, it will be able to request it, find it, get it loaded up, and send it back to you. So we can kind of think of this as like spaghetti and meatballs, as our little diagram is showing here. Maybe you as the customer is expecting spaghetti and meatballs. You're expecting the noodles in a specific kind of noodle. You're specifically trying to get, maybe mushroom, pork, and veal meatballs, and you just want a red pasta sauce. And so, you make the request specifically to the server for that. And hopefully the server will then send you back that exact pasta from the back end using the request and fetching method. Now, the way this cycle works is that we start off as the customer. We're saying, hey, we're going to have this method that gets us our item. We're going to send the request for it, which is going to be called a promise. A promise will then either be converted and resolve into a response, or it'll resolve into an error if there is no spaghetti and meatballs in the back end. In this case, we should expect that our information goes through. So I would not try to worry too much about the errors in this moment. We're going to just try to go through a smooth demonstration of, it flowing. Almost every single website has something to do with an API. APIs are just one of the quickest ways to find information for a database and store it so that we can eventually use later on. Not only can you get that information, you can make modifications of it if you have the right keys. You can make, updates to that data. And, we can just build relationships with that data over time. One such website that does this is Facebook, a very, big website that many of you may be using, maybe many of you know, maybe, you don't use it anymore, but that there are individuals that do use it, such as maybe your parents or your siblings. But overall, what's going on in Facebook is that when a user logs in, right? Well, before they even log in, they don't really have access to too much information, right? They can't see other people's profiles if they put on private. They can't see special events that are happening on there if those events are private. They don't see a lot of different photos, but they are stored in a database in Facebook. And so once you log in, you then get access to all this information. You retrieve all of this because you logged in and you're getting back all that data from the server once you make that request. And so in this case, our person, Josephine, just logged in. She's looking through her website, and right away, she's getting back immediate posts that other people are posting up. These are this is a slew of data that's being given to her from Facebook's API due to just how they developed it and how they make requests happen. So, as I kind of explained earlier, when a client makes a query to a server, the server is going to give you a promise saying, okay, hold on one moment. I need to go look for this information. If the client has not given the correct kind of credentials for that, giving the right, links for that, or the right parameters in any sort, you can end up getting an error during that. However, if you are giving all that correct information, if you're giving the correct options, and you're selecting all the correct stuff, you should get back a response from that API. And ultimately, that's the overall cycle. Now, the promise that we initially are given from the server is just a dictation of how much time that may take. We're kind of told that, like, hey, keep doing everything else you're doing. I'm eventually going to get back to you with data. Now, many people may be thinking right now, wait, wouldn't that break our websites? Doesn't our computer have to have this back and forth action? This fetch request is kind of asynchronous and allows for the application to kind of keep running in some circumstances and pause on some other. And so, that's kind of the neat thing that's happening here, where we're just able to have this asynchronicity of data occurring all around and give us the moment to be like, oh, I've just gotten my information. Now, Facebook and other websites have all this error handling as well, where, they've built out, hey, what happens when we don't meet certain criteria, when I didn't insert my password correctly, when, that user's post got deleted right as I liked it. they will have all these other additional pieces of information coming to you. And as the front-end developer, we're kind of just taking those in and updating our website accordingly, whether that's with errors or with the correct data. So that's kind of everything I just described here. But a couple other things to note is some of these HTTP verbs that we got going on, which is post, patch, or put, delete, and get. These are kind of the four main RESTful events that will happen throughout an API. Overall, that would make any API super useful to anybody because we're able to post the data, which means that we're putting it onto some just server. We're able to get the data, meaning we're able to take it. We're able to delete it or destroy it at any point when we don't want that information any longer stored in our database. And we're able to eventually update it if there's any update in there. So if we don't want our photo to, have the tags on it from our friends, Instagram's a great example of this as well, which is also owned by Facebook. Instagram's another great example where you're kind of, maybe you didn't want to have the photos exactly there. You want to update it with some other filters. Maybe you want to add in a couple of extra different captions or different tags. This is all capable thanks to those four important HTTP verbs. Most servers will have access for that for one person or another due to just how the admin will work. Okay. Hope that everyone's understanding. If anybody has any questions, please do answer. If I'm going too fast, let Catherine know to let me know. I'll try to keep tabs on this as well.
Awesome. So far, we look pretty good. I saw one question where someone was asking, he needs some help getting the bearer token through Azure in Graph API. I don't know if that's something you can jump on maybe at the end, but I just wanted to bring that one to your attention.
Gotcha. Yeah, that might be a whole different piece there, Rowan. We're kind of going through the basics here today, but if there's time, I'll see if I can help you out today. All right.
Thanks, Demetria.
Okay, so fetch is kind of what we're using as a built-in function inside of JavaScript to help us do this. Fetch is super important. And so you couldn't have, it's not that you couldn't have, but JavaScript recognized how important it was to communicate with these APIs that they have built this function internally into the language so that we can make these requests. That method will take in an endpoint usually, passed as a single argument inside of there. Usually it's a string that will include the URL where, maybe a slash, depending on if our URL might have multiple endpoints, and giving us maybe even integers or other kind of strings interpolated into that so that we can maybe make different kinds of requests. And then we usually have another built-in function that's included in there called a .then function, which basically says, okay, after this is completed, .then will then take whatever has happened next and do another action on that. Usually taking the promise, turning into JSON information, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And that just basically says that we're taking the data that we previously just got. It comes in a string. That's just how servers will respond back. You'll just give us a giant string with lots of information. And then .json method on that string will help convert it into a format that JavaScript can actually use. And then we have another .then that we usually use that helps us access and manipulate that data that we've now received finally in our .then. So for today, we're going to be doing a deliverables of, we're going to have a random fact button. With that random fact button, we're going to click on it so that we can get our random fact and display it on our page. If you're curious about what API I'm working with, it's inside of the docs, inside of the deck. We're going to be specifically manipulating the DOM. And we're going to just kind of roam this documentation to make sure that we're able to understand it, know how to utilize it, and know how to eventually manipulate it. I will be coding into this replit. I ask if any of you have joined it, please do not code in it right now. It's just for demonstration purposes. I'm giving you the link so that you can later use it later on. I might write additional information in the future as well, but please try not to make any huge changes while I'm also in the middle of coding.
And we will provide that link in the email that you get with this recording after the fact, so you can take a look at the code that Demetrio is working on tonight.
All right, so first let's start with our replit, which basically we're starting off in our index.html. Our index.html is going to be very simple. We're just going to have a background. We're going to have, I hope everybody sees this too. Am I sharing the right screen right now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, gotcha. Just making sure. So it looks like people are trying to manipulate my code right now. So again, I ask you to please don't do that. I will have to start kicking people out of here if that's the case. And I will fully exercise that if that's the case. Looks like some other people are also adding in some more code here.
They are asking if you can increase fonts in the browser tab. It is a little tiny.
Okay, I definitely can. Is this good? Is this too big? You can go like maybe one smaller.
Let me know in the chat what it looks like for you. I'm getting good, better.
Okay,
yep.
Awesome.
Somebody else said it was good when it was bigger.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Awesome. So again, please don't manipulate anything that I got going on here. If you start manipulating as I'm trying to code out, we may hit errors, and we don't exactly want to. We don't exactly want me erroring out and me trying to figure this out while also trying to explain this to you. I'm happy to debug with you as well, but for the purposes of this, let's keep it to the debugging of my specific work. If you have any questions about it, bring it up. Let Catherine know, I'm confused by this code, how he did X, Y, and Z, why he got past that error without really doing anything. That's totally fine. Okay. So we know that our deliverable is, let's see if I can just, yeah, okay. We know that our deliverable is to eventually manipulate a specific API so that we can eventually, sorry, one second. It looks like I got some other code here. So we know that we want to manipulate an API so that we eventually are able to kind of get information here onto our page, so that when we click this button, get random fact, we fill this section up with a link. So how are we going to go about that? What are we going to use for this? Well, the first thing to kind of note is what data set are we working with? What API are we working with? And this is the API that I chose to use today. It's called Trivia, the Trivia API. I could put a link on it, link of it down here below. But overall, we get to the information about this API and we check out how it works. It will tell us, what URLs that we're going to be working with. It'll tell us how to grab information, and it might have other information like facts. It might tell us about licenses if we're trying to publish this and have people use this for more direct reasons. If we eventually have to, have a commercial use for this, we're going to have to purchase API keys so that we can allow for more and more requests when we're doing this. We're not concerned about that. We're using it for free today. I'm not expecting to make 1 million requests today, and I'm not expecting them to error out today. But what we got going on here, will you increase the font? So I can increase the font here. Overall, this information you can check out on your own when you're looking on the website itself. Again, I posted that on the chat, and I'll post another link right there. You can check out the documentation as well. Check out how it looks. It'll give you answers right away. How can you answer? How do I get request from the API? It'll give you the get request for that. You don't need an API key. It tells us that right off the bat, unless we're doing commercial use. It'll give us kind of answers about any of our other questions. We can ask, how can we contribute? We can submit more questions. We can review questions. We can request features potentially. That this is obviously run by somebody who does this for free, and they're just trying to manage this as best as possible. So this might be even useful if you're ever a Jeopardy fan and you're trying to get into Jeopardy, a good way to kind of start practicing. So they kind of give us a general how to get all the items. And I'm going to have to lower this a little bit because the CSS on this website is a little bit different. But they have four different get requests that they allow you to do. They do get questions, get categories, get metadata, and get tags. Now, for the purposes of this, we're going to focus only on get questions. This is going to be the best way for us to eventually get random trivia questions. And where we're going to start with is kind of figuring out how many questions, like basically filling out what these different kind of query pieces are, whether we want it to fill a specific category, whether we want it to be a specific difficulty, how many questions we want it to return. So maybe we want just one question to be returned. What are the tags that we want on? So we can see that there's different kind of tags such as advertising, agile methodologies, a fun fact about Baltimore, and we can kind of include that in here, and it will kind of add in this piece of query to there. Now, again, we're going to simplify this. We're not going to add in all these additional things. We're not too worried about the language right now. We're going to focus on English. That's kind of what we're working with at the moment. Not to discriminate against anybody about that. It's just for the simplicity of time and space here. So we're going to focus on getting just one trivia question and one answer out of this. And let's see. So what I'm going to do here is the first pieces of my code that I'm going to work with here are going to be kind of overall, what am I grabbing? How am I grabbing it? Now, if you've already been manipulating JavaScript, you've already been kind of grabbing elements, you'll know that we have to grab our nodes in which an action is happening. One such node that we need to grab is this button specifically, so that when this button gets clicked, we get that fact placed into there. And that fact will have to go into this div, right? This is the div that I'm taking the assumption right now is where we're placing information. So eventually I'm going to need this little piece of information here, go over here, and I'm going to have to create a small node getter here for that. And I'm just going to do random fact div is going to equal to document dot get element by ID. And I'm going to place inside of a string that random fact div ID there, so that, and I think I accidentally put capital D at the end. But what this allows me to do now is that now I have two of my nodes, the button that is previously stated in the HTML, and my random fact div in which I will be placing my information in. Now, one neat thing about buttons is that we can attach an event listener. Honestly, any element within JavaScript can attach an event listener. And what I want this event listener to eventually do is I want it to attach information that I get from this fetch request onto that div. Now, right now, I have no way of confirming that. I have no way of confirming a fetch is going to work. I have no way of confirming that anything's getting done. So let me start off by just getting anything onto the DOM. And what I'm going to do is when this button gets clicked, I want fetch fact to kick in. and I kind of accidentally ran it in a way that I wasn't expecting. Let me make sure that this is running correctly. But I want fetch fact to run. Now I can't call on fetch fact immediately by invoking the function here. Otherwise, when the page loads, it will immediately start running. So that's why I just deleted the 2 parentheses there, because I was accidentally invoking the function right away. So the first thing I want to do is when I click on that button, I just want to put like a little hello world inside of the random fact div. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call on random fact div, that node that I earlier got. I'm going to call on its inner text, because the inner text is going to be an attribute part of our text. And it's going, well, not part of the text, part of the div. And when you call on inner text, it allows for us to put in any string inside of there to put any information. So in this case, I'm going to put in just hello world, so that when it gets clicked, it goes ahead and places it inside that div. Now it's going to take a second to load. And I'm reading what is the difference between inner text and text content. Inner text and text content are different in one simple way. Text content is more for when you have an attribute of an input. You want to be able to have a lot of text in there. That's when you'll get text content that you'll constantly be manipulating as the user will be updating. Inner text is kind of like when our code wants to manipulate that text. So we have to confirm that this is running, but get random fact is not running. It's saying cannot set properties of null of inner text on random fact div. So that tells me that we might have called something incorrectly here, or I might have done some slight kind of spelling error here. So I'll probably go back into here, make sure that random fact div looks correct, which it does. Oh, it's because it's a class, not an ID. That was on me. I'm just going to call these all ID for the purposes, because I'm using get element by ID. But if it was a class, I would kind of use a query selector instead. So now that I feel like I solved that, let's double check the work real quick. And this is taking a little bit. So if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Oh, and look at that. Christopher answered my question earlier. Oh, let's see. So maybe I shouldn't have done that to the class. Maybe I should keep this as class. I'm going to call that class as well. It didn't like that I changed that to ID, which makes sense, which means that I need to do this into a query selector for the random get element by ID. And when we're working with classes, we'll have to do the hashtag right there, or the pound sign, depending on who you're asking. Now, excellent. Brittany is already getting it to show hello world on hers when she presses the get random fact. Now, in the meantime, while I'm kind of waiting for that to load, I eventually know that I'm going to have to create a fetch request. And the structure of that fetch request is going to look something like this, where I have a string. I know that is going to eventually be a URL. I'm going to have a .then. I'm going to have another .then here. Now, ultimately, I'm not bothered that I don't have the event here. Oh, look at that. Let's see. Get random fact does not want to place that text in there. So what F is not defined? Is that because I was in the middle of typing this right when it loaded? Probably. See, this is why you have to wait, and this is why. Okay, so cannot set property of null of inner text. So it's complaining still. Oh, it's probably this whole situation that's also causing some errors here. This is why jumping the gun isn't quite very effective for everybody. And I'm probably still missing something here. What could I be missing? Is that, oh, maybe these should actually be dots instead of hashtags. Thank you everybody for being patient. Yes, it should be random fact. And let's see. Let's see. Sorry, everybody, for making you wait. I'm clearly jumping around a lot while trying to fix this. Sometimes Replit is not as fast as you would like it to be. Replit is an IDE, online IDE that kind of allows you to have an environment ready to code in without having to do too much more work than necessary. I could do this in my own VS Code and kind of load that up, but for the purposes of demonstrating this in like real time as we're kind of going through, I'm kind of choosing to go this route. Okay, I finally got it to work. Look at that. Look at me. I'm being successful finally. So we finally got that to work correctly. So clearly our button's working the way we expect it to be, and our random fact div is working the way we expect it to be. So right now, this is kind of what I have going inner text. But now you want to make this fetch call, right? And that fetch call we want to do is with this API URL. We want this to give us a random question and a random answer so that we can give you a random trivia fact. So we're going to put the URL in here, which kind of just goes right to the API. It's going to make a request. We have to then do a .then. We will take the response that it gives us, and we want to do r.json on it to convert it into that JavaScript object notation. After that, we want to then take that data, and we're going to probably try to do something with it. And initially, what we're going to try to do is actually console log it, so that when we are checking our information, we kind of are able to see what that trivia is. Just to like check it before we actually start manipulating it though. And I'm going to actually put data right there, and I'm going to comment this piece out. All right, cool. So I'm going to run this. And now every time I click on get random fact, I should be able to see a console log when I go into my console. So I'm going to click get random fact. I'm going to open up that console that's down below. And look, I have an array with a singular object in it. And when I open up that array, well, when I open up that first array, it tells me there's an object in there. There's another kind of piece in here. There we go. We got the object. It tells me the category of it, the correct answer of it, the difficulty of the question, incorrect answers if it wants to give that to me. Is this a niche subject? What is the question? And kind of the regions that it might belong to. It's not giving us any regions, and tags. And the tags seem to be business, marketing, drink, and society and culture. So how do we get this information to display on there now that we've seen it? Well, if you've done any data manipulation, the simple way to kind of start gathering this information is to start kind of calling onto it in one degree or another. So in this case, I know that I'm manipulating an array here, or I'm grabbing an array's information. And I know it's the first element inside of that. So I'm just using 0 to grab that item in there. And so when I click run, now when I press on the button and it console logs, now I get that whole object that originally we were looking at, right? And so Now, if I want some information from that object, I'm going to need to pull all these different keys out. And so what I'm going to do, instead of trying to do all of that inside of the fetch fact, is I'm going to create a helper function for myself. And I'm going to call it const render trivia. And it's going to need to take in some information here. First, I need to finish kind of writing out my function. It's going to need to take in some information in order to do the work that we're about to do. It's going to need to be able to take the trivia object. And I'm going to specifically call it trivia object like this so that I know I'm working with an object in the future. There is no question about that. There is no kind of like wondering, am I really like, what is this data? I've kind of given it a name, and this is what I'm expecting to pass through it when I work with it. In this case, like when you look up here on my line 4, when I wrote data, I don't typically like writing data. I like to write exactly what I'm getting. So it'd be like trivia response, I might give it, or trivia data array is what I'll kind of give it as information to kind of distinguish it so that when I come back to these variables or when I come back to any of these different kind of name things that I'm working with in later times when I want to edit this, I just have something that kind of will dictate to me exactly what I'm working with. And remember that when you rename it, you have to rename it everywhere you've renamed it. So I know that I want this to kind of eventually be when exactly it kicks in. When after the dot then, I know I need to render that trivia data. So I know that's the kind of the prime time to when to kick in render trivia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the first argument that I originally put in there, which was the string of trivia, right? Which is down here. And I'm going to also replace this console log, because just like my function that I just created, console log is also a function. But now I'm just replacing this function with my own so that I can manipulate it the way I want it to. So we now should be technically getting trivia objects into the render trivia whenever we click on this button, as long as this is successful. If it's not successful, then I'm not going to be able to do anything with this data. Now, when should I know I'm successful or not? Kind of previously, we could test again with the console log and test the trivia object again, just to make sure that's coming into this function. But I'm 100% positive it's coming in at this point. I'm 100% sure about this. If I do get an error, I think I can potentially troubleshoot this. Don't quote me though. Maybe I might hit an error here that I can't fix. So what we first want to do is kind of similar to what we were doing before, right? We want to take that trivia and we want to put it into that div, right? So what pieces of that trivia object do we need? Well, earlier we console logged it, right? And we have this object that we have to manipulate that we have, and we can take a look at it and kind of see exactly what we're trying to grab out of it. The question here that it has will be accessible once we do trivia object dot question. Now this value will appear whenever I call it exactly like this. This string should appear. And to prove to you that, what I'm going to do is now take, let's see, random factive dot and give its inner text here. And so all I'm doing is taking what this represents as a string and placing that on the inner text. So when I run this and I click on the button, I should get a question on that little trivia box. Now, again, I have to wait until this fully loads, kind of making this a little more difficult as I'm writing. It's probably because I'm running Zoom and probably because I have multiple people inside of this replit that it's just like taking a little while to show up. Once you're ready, replit. In the meanwhile, thank you, Maria, for having the patience with me. But now, when I click on get random fact, I have a cat's blank can't move sideways. I'm getting that question that originally was supposed to be showing up, thanks to this dot question piece. Now, obviously, we don't want to just show our question only. We want to show the answer there too, because we want a fun trivia question. Maybe we're in charge of trivia nights at a bar. Maybe we want to kind of like help, develop our skills in Jeopardy. Who knows? We're just trying to get all that information onto a single area in order to be able to visualize it when we click on this button. So in order to do that, we're going to have to create some new elements here. And we're no longer going to be using inner text as our piece here. We're going to actually use a neat thing called append to help do that. But first, let me start creating my elements. So I need to create 2 elements for every time I click on this trivia button, right? I need to create the question kind of section that I'm going to put in, and this I will probably name, let's call it question p tag, because I'm going to be creating a p tag for this. Let's see. And it will be document.createElement. Nope. And in that element, we want to create just a p tag. So all we have to do is call on the p there. And we're going to have to do something similar for our answer. And I'm going to have a new p tag for this. And I'm going to go like document.createElement. And just like with the previous element that was a p tag, I'm just going to do that. Now, what this does is that now this variable question p tag and answer p tag both have their own individual element assigned to that, meaning that when I call on answer p tag or question p tag at any moment in the future, I can always manipulate that when I'm working within this function. If I need to call it on any other moment, I may need to make this a global variable if that's the case. This just has to do with scope, and that's not the topic of the conversation today, but it's something important to realize that once I create this element and it's inside of this function, I'm able to manipulate it only within this function. All right, so I create these 2 elements, but I need them to have inner text as well. So in this case, I know that I need my question p tag to have a specific inner text, right? And what we declare it to be earlier? We declared it that it needed to be the trivia object's key of question, right? And we need to eventually have it show up, right? And that's where our neat little method here, append, is actually going to help us here. So we're going to do .append. And what .append does is it takes the element that we're going to work on it, which is the random fact div. It takes it and it's going to append something on it, usually on the bottom of inside this tag. Now, if you were to think about it, most elements are squares. Yes, I do apologize. Any participants, if you seem to be highlighting this, make sure to unhighlight afterwards. It's causing a little bit of disturbance as people are trying to kind of read the code while I'm typing it. It even kind of disrupts me a little bit when I'm seeing your names pop up after you've highlighted something. If it's possible, please just click off of the script.js by clicking on a blank space here or clicking away, just so that I can have it gone, or click into like the index.html so that your tag comes up there, not on the script.js. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. And thank you, Sherry and Brittany, for kind of calling out to that. Awesome. So I'm doing the append method, and what the append method does is that it appends something to the bottom of that square of the element. Now, all elements to some degree are a square. In this case, I have a window. I have the background of that window, which is kind of purely inside of that space. And then this is the div right here, this little white square. And so when I append something in there, I'll have to call on it in here with either a string or the element that I want to grab. In this case, I want to grab the question p tag. and place it inside of there once I've created it and insert the information. So I'm clicking run. Now, when I get this random fact, I should expect a p tag that says our question. Now, what's missing here? Oh, well, we don't exactly have our rest of our answer yet, right? Well, that's because I haven't put it there yet. And that's because I haven't pulled it out of the trivia object yet either. So in this case, we know that we want to put it inside of our other tag, the answer p tag. And we know that the inner text here is going to be equal to trivia object dot answer, right? And now what our little append is doing here is it doesn't just append one item, but it appends one after another, as long as you put in the commas and your following arguments. So if I wanted to, I could put an empty string in here and it'll plug that in. And I can then also put in the answer p tag. So when I run this, you may not even see this empty string as it shows up. But if we wanted to, we can append multiple items onto this when we press on this button. So now, when I click on Get Random Button, I should expect both the question and the answer here getting posted onto that little section. And it does get posted, but man, does it look terrible, doesn't it? This is all manipulation of CSS. And what I could do here is kind of just like force the kind of width of this to be kind of a little bit greater. And that should help increase that so that when I click on random fact, it looks a little bit better. But it still kind of looks a little ugly, doesn't it? Because we're all of a sudden kind of not fully separated from each other. So we can always kind of do a little bit of work inside of here where we do random factive. We can have the items that are inside of it. Oh, well, that could be one reason that that's happening. We have a double B in there. Random button div, random fact div. We want the random fact div to have its contents to be center, and we want them. Maybe we don't want it to align center. And so now when we click run, we can have this look a little bit better. We click on random fact. It's still not quite giving us what we're expecting. Maybe I'll just erase a little bit more. Kind of give the run. And it's looking a little bit better, but we're still missing an answer here. Oh, the answer is coming out undefined. I don't know if anybody's noticed that yet. So what does that tell us? That tells us that maybe we're missing some information about the answer. Maybe it wasn't expecting it. It's not because my answer is wrong. It's because maybe there's not information inside of here. So let's double check our information to double check that, hey, are we actually getting a string when we console log answer from the trivia? So what I'm going to do is just trivia object.answer. And I'm going to click run just to double check what that looks like when I'm running. I also might manipulate a little bit more CSS by doing this random dash fact dash div p to eventually give me margin. Margin's kind of the area outside of the box. And I want that margin to be, let's say, 20 pixels. We'll start it off at. And when I click run, it should run soon. Okay, so we got it running. We click on it. We're getting a little bit better of kind of separation. We're still getting that undefined. We're getting undefined with our P. So maybe we want to just check the trivia object to see okay, why would that happen with any of our questions, right? We don't want that to be the case. We want it to be able to click on this button and get the answer. And let's take a look at why that might be the case. Oh, I see why. And maybe some of you can name it as well. It's because it's not answer, it's correct answer. Because this is supposed to be kind of a little trivia game API. And it means that it wants to give incorrect answers too, to kind of give you the multiple choice if you ever want to go down that route. So it looks like I didn't name my variable of the key here correctly. And I need to do correct answer. So now when I run this and I click on this button, I should correctly be able to finally get my random fact. So what country administers Martinique? France. Awesome. So we got our application working. A simplified version, obviously, right? Nothing too complex, nothing too, wild, but this shows you kind of like, what you can do. Oh, and look at that. Every time I click on this button, I would say it looks like it's adding in new questions. And we probably may not want that. We don't want it trailing off. So there's probably one more thing we need to get done before we finish off this little thing. We need to take the random fact div that we've created, and we need to set the inner text of it to an empty string. And all we're doing then is just basically eliminating everything that's inside of there whenever we press on this get random fact. And look at that. It replaces every time that we click on it, and we're able to see it. And that kind of concludes our information here today. I see that there may be some questions. I see that people are wondering, this is supposed to be for beginners. This is kind of early kind of coding that you can witness when you are coding. Once you get into the program, we'll have you kind of be able to understand and be able to implement this relatively easy. Pages that used to be built on MySpace, on Tumblr, on a previous version on Facebook, very much ran on this early JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript style. But we'll be teaching you more advanced ways to be able to kind of put down information like this, and we'll be able to teach you kind of additional ways to kind of demonstrate data and manipulate data within the program. So let me kind of, Catherine, if you don't mind helping me organize whatever questions people may have gotten. I know there's kind of plenty of things that are placed onto here.
Yep. So let's see. We've got, can we talk about the syntax in the document? For example, some of the code runs when the page loads versus button press, then the .then after the fetch function, also the const data type, just any explanations to help clear it up.
Yeah, so JavaScript doesn't exactly run the way that you would think like a recipe is working. What I mean by that is recipe usually you have to follow instructions line by line by line, right? In the case of this, our fetch fact is not exactly working until the moment we click on the button, right? That's the only time in which this triggers. And so the reason that's happening is down here, the get random fact button dot add event listener. What's happening here is that we added this function that is listening for whenever we click on our button, and we say, hey, when this kind of element listens for that click, when it finds it and hears about it, we want it to do this following function. After that, these two kind of pieces of code are running immediately when we render our HTML. That happens because of inside of our HTML, we have this piece, this line 7, where it says script defer source script.js. What's that doing is saying, when you load up the HTML, bring in this package of JavaScript, and the defer says, let me load up the HTML, then the JavaScript go ahead and run. So the JavaScript then has the opportunity to be read by our interpreter, in this case, the browser. And from there, our browser will see, oh, this is a function that's been created. I don't need to do anything with it right away. Line 8 is another function that's been created. I don't have to do anything with it. So it's just probably like putting it away like this, right? And then it sees these two things. We're like, oh, this person needs 2 variables in order to be able to access this information. And then we use one of those variables, which you can see on line 20, it's being highlighted as soon as I highlight this one, to add that event listener, give it that click, and give it the fetch fact. And that allows for all of this to work simultaneously. Now, if I were to put this piece all the way up here, if I were to put this piece of code all the way to the top up here and run this, what's going to happen, I'm going to get a small error. And that error is going to tell me that there's probably, this is null. Oh, there you go. Cannot access random fact button before initialization, meaning that we never created this line. And so it's not possible for us to add an event listener when we load up our page. So we just have to move that to the bottom here when we're working with it. The same thing goes for that fetch fact. Because if we put this up above, fetch fact would be below, it would not recognize that fetch fact has been created as a function yet. This is just due to the weirdness of how Replit works as well. This defer technically should be preventing that from happening, but Replits and like online IDEs aren't foolproof. There's obviously going to be errors that happen based on just moving code around. Cool. I'm seeing plenty more questions. Let's see. How do you take a class on JavaScript from Shelly? A class is created kind of by when you just go about this way. You have to kind of use the class keyword. This may not be the correct way to do it in vanilla JavaScript. Create the class keyword, you create the object that you want to create. So let's say we want maybe a trivia box to be created, and it will have its variables and functionality that it will need to be created. Now, this is probably not 100% correct how you would write it inside of JavaScript, but this would be kind of an overall idea of how this is getting made. For those of you who don't really know what a class is basically our program saying, hey, I want a factory for building pieces that are similar or alike. And to kind of help demonstrate that, we'll kind of go back to the API here. And let's say we had multiple users who wanted to have like multiple, create multiple of these, right? What our factory of a class here, this trivia object, right? What it allows for us is to say, hey, each one's going to get a category, each one's going to get an ID, each one's going to have correct answer or incorrect answers, and so on and so forth. In order for us to be able to have a relationship of data with all this stuff, even your incorrect answers might be objects on their own that are associated with this. And that's kind of what a class does. It just helps create a factory in which you're building more of these objects and instances of these objects to use later. Strings are kind of a way to do this as well. Strings are an example of this, where every time I create a string, technically that is an object within JavaScript. It has methods like .length, which gives the property of how many characters are inside that string. It has methods that you can do like a for loop on this, for loop of like going through each character. I probably shouldn't kind of jump into this rabbit hole, but Shelley, that should give you a glimpse of what a JavaScript class is. Let's see. Lakia, you want to talk about the syntax here in the document. For example, some of the code runs when the page loads. Oh yeah, I think I answered this question.
You did.
Let's see. True that the software engineering program is moving from Ruby on Rails to Python beginning next year. I think, Catherine, you might have more answers to that than I do. I have some answers, but I don't have, I think, an accurate. I don't want to give in any more information that I need to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have accurate information on that either. That it would be a good idea for us to share at this point. Mostly just because I don't have details on that.
Understood. So for now, I'm just going to say, while that is a good question, Python and Ruby on Rails are very similar to each other as languages. There are some key differences in what they do and how they work. And I would not be too hung up on whether you've learned Python or Ruby. Once you go through this program, you should be able to learn any language going forward. So if you're kind of depending on, oh, I'd like a job in Python in the future, or I want a job in Ruby, just know that eventually the goal while going through this program is not to know a language fully and, perfectly. There's no way to actually do that. Your best bet is to learn a language, learn how to read the documentation, and learn how to be able to learn a new language just as quickly as you're going to learn these. Those will help you in the long term in terms of like future job employment or any other kind of prospects. I'm seeing from Irvi, to anyone starting off coding, I suggest learning HTML, then CSS, then DOM before JavaScript. While I don't disagree with you, Irvi, that HTML and CSS might be, better things to learn in the beginning, I would say HTML is more like, if we are building kind of a house, it's more of the wood as the framework. It's not 100% necessary to know how to do that, because you can have someone else build that ultimately. It is going to be key to understand HTML. I would suggest being able to know what you're using as HTML elements, knowing what is a div, what is a button, what is a p tag or a body. But do I expect everyone to fully know how to build everything in HTML? No, I would say leave that work for the JavaScript. CSS, on the other hand, CSS is purely for aesthetics. Within the software engineering program itself, we don't cover it too much. We actually encourage students to learn CSS frameworks, so that they can more focus on the functionality of websites than trying to learn, what exactly does all this mean and do when I'm working with it. The reason that I'm going to argue that CSS is not as important is, it's easy to learn a little bit on the fly. You can learn the basics by learning height, width, and margin, padding. These are kind of the basics. They give us a general framework, and there's more CSS blogs out there that can help you continue on. Why are APIs called REST APIs? A REST API is kind of indicative of having the ability to have the read, update, create, and destroy HTML, what we went over, the HTML verbs, or the HTTP verbs. Basically, you want to have coherent, RESTful endpoints on your API that will do one of these 4 actions, whether that's creating something, getting it so that you can read it, updating it, or destroying it. There's more kind of to that acronym of REST, but so long as you follow the practices of making sure that they're distinct, that they're individualized for the different models that you have, and that they do the verb that they're going to, that should all fill in that information for you. Josh, what about catching errors? Great question. Errors, error handling within here can happen in kind of 2 places. You can either have it happen here on, let's see, I think it's .catch, meaning that if an error happens here, we're trying to maybe do an alert and have that alert, give us a string, uh-oh, something went wrong, right? Now, this is kind of like a very elementary error catching where all it does is say something broke, but we're not kind of doing anything afterwards, whether we're trying to reload part of the screen or reload anything that's going on in there to prevent the website from breaking or giving us more errors here. If you wanted to learn that, that is something that you can learn within the program. For now, I'm going to kind of prevent us from going down that rabbit hole because there's multiple ways to kind of solve that problem at the same time. Sandra, yes, Catherine already gave the link for the code there. Thank you, Brittany, for giving the class. And that's really helpful. A question on the const data type. What is the symbol? Okay. Lakey, so you have a question about here, this arrow right here. Basically, what I've created here, instead of using like function fetch fact, which would be the other way of writing this, I've used a arrow function. This is just another way to write a function. It has the ability to bind data specifically to it and doesn't allow data to escape out of it, but it's really not too distinctly different from how to write it in this way. It's just how I wrote it because out of habit, this is how I write my functions. Let's see. Joanne, books, as far as like trying to understand this for the basics, I would say that kind of think of each topic that you're learning here as there's a rhyme and reason for it. There's a purpose to learning about these functions and how they work. So, kind of the first step of learning here is like, what is a variable? Oh, a variable is just something that you create to eventually assign some piece of data to it. What is a function? A function is a series of steps written in code that allow you to perform some sort of interconnectivity within a website. And then you start getting into the nitty-gritty of those definitions by saying, well, how do I use functions inside of my code? And so on and so forth. You could grab a book on that, but your best bet is to always practice, practice, practice. One of my favorite kind of websites to tell students to use is just use Code Wars, codewars.com. Use that basics or like use the fundamentals kind of section of that to kind of give you that habit of working with different kinds of methods and codes that exist. We can easily look up kind of methods using like MDN documentation. And if you're ever curious on learning on your own, if you go to MDN, like this website, when you go to that website, it is kind of one of the best abilities to access information. You're able to use references on like HTML, on JavaScript. You get to use, it'll tell you guides. But practice is probably going to be your best bet whenever you're working with code, because code changes fast. Within the last 10 years, we've developed quite a few different frameworks. GraphQL is relatively new in terms of how it's being implemented. Rust is a new language for backend development, and all of these things are continuously evolving as we go through. Let's see. So I'm seeing people kind of asking about, oh, and somebody answered about the arrow functionality, Mary. Cool. I'm seeing quite a few questions answered. How do you fork this? If you're wondering how to fork it, once you go onto here, if you click API demo, you click those 3 dots and you click fork, you can then fork this into a new replit, in case anybody was wondering. Brittany, yes, you're right. You can do a lot of JavaScript in the console alone. And the developer tools / console, there's a lot of neat things about this tool here that do a lot. It's not just even doing coding. You can find the sources of data inside of here. You can find, performance insights of how quick your website's working. There's a lot to learn inside of here alone, but it's a never-ending kind of learning space. There's plenty of things to kind of do in here to help debug your applications. So if you're ever exploring it, take the time, really go through it and ask questions. Let's see. If I want to build the website from scratch, what should I learn? I don't want to pay somebody on Fiverr. It depends on the kind of website that you're trying to build. If you want to build just a simple website where it's not doing anything, the very basics you need to know is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and probably Git. Git is just how we upload code onto kind of servers or onto just GitHub in general, which is where we store information for our websites. They provide also free access to creating your own pages, so you can have your own websites as you're going through. Cool. And otherwise, it seems like many of you, oh, I got a question about .then function. Can you explain that and how to use it? So the .then function is basically an asynchronous function that works with fetch, that says, hey, as you're searching for your data and you're waiting for that you're waiting for the server to give you some sort of response, I'm going to wait here, and once I get it, then I'm going to then perform these actions. Usually this is just a callback function inside of here, meaning that this is just a function that's inside of here that takes the response, and we're taking that response and we're returning it as JSON information. Same thing here, where after that's been converted, we're going to next do trivia data array. Config file that you do not, there should be no config file in here. There should only be these 3 files that are in here. You need the index.html, the script.js, and the style CSS. As long as all this code looks correct, that's in here, which this should be working as well. And in this order as well, this should work for you, Brittany, in case anything that's going wrong. Oh, no, it wasn't Brittany, it was C. But yeah, I'm seeing, oh, there's more questions. Let's see.
Yeah, we've got one in the Q&A that I think rolled by on the chat as well. Can you break down what trivia data array, render trivia, or what are the functions, objects, arguments, and how are they working together?
Yeah, so trivia data array is just what I'm calling whatever's returned from this. This will look like basically the array that I console logged earlier that stored that one trivia object in there. Render trivia is just a function that I created that will take in an argument. In this case, I knew that I was going to be sending an object at all times to my render trivia. And so I knew that I was pulling that by calling this, the 0 here in front of that array. This is just basic kind of data structure manipulation. Arrays, when you have them, and I'm going to just kind of call this one new array, will look like this, right? Where there are 2 square brackets. In order to get any element that's inside of it, I will have to call new array. And I will have to pull in whatever integer of the element. And I think this might be confusing for people. So instead of doing 1, 2, 3, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. And what this new array 0 is going to do is say, oh, I'm going to pull, I'm basically returning the first element in the array. The way arrays work is that the number leftmost starts at 0 and then goes up by 1 following. Objects, when we have objects, will look like this. They'll usually have curly braces, and inside of there, they'll have different keys. So we'll have the key of 1, which we'll have as 1, 2, which will be 2, and 3. These are not in order. Whenever you call in an object's information, there is no order to it. So you can't do new object 0 like we did with our previous array. These are more like dictionaries. And with dictionaries, you're kind of looking through and saying, hey, I want to find letter A, I'm looking for the word flat. And so when you go to flat, it will give you the information. It'll return that information. So in this case, it'll be new object.1, and that will return us the number 1 as an integer. And so just comment all those out. Nope. So I comment these out quick. So that's kind of like what I'm doing there when it comes to this trivia data array. I've just named it what my return is from this dot then. I'm returning just the first element that's inside of it. Here, as the argument, I just wanted to name it something specific so I can utilize, and I know I will be able to feel kind of confident that's what it is. But I could have named this anything. I could name this like Jackson, right? And everything that this object is, and every time I call on it, will be named Jackson. It doesn't matter what I've named it, like what this was named previously, as long as I pass this into here and I know what it is, it's just able to work. But I like to be very specific when I name my elements and my objects and my strings. I don't like kind of naming it like the letter T for trivia. This helps just like not only myself kind of know what I'm doing, but also others when they're manipulating code of mine know how to go about and read it. All right. Any good quality blog post and resources for learning script language? There are tons and tons of resources, honestly, more than I can ever name. What I have done previously is kind of gather resources using like a Google Sheet, and I'll put every link and the topic that it's covering into somewhere and kind of separate it out into different sheets to kind of help separate those blogs. But one kind of good links to kind of help you out, I would give you Odin Project. This is definitely a great place to start. They have plenty of lessons and work there. I would do Code Wars. this is kind of like a good place to practice over and over again. And earlier, I kind of mentioned the MD on documentation. MD on documentation here, definitely quality stuff when you're working with it. They kind of have some of the best blogs there. And last, CSS Tricks is one of my favorite sites for whenever I'm doing like any CSS. They have plenty of guides to show and send and have for you. Let's see. Catherine, can you send those links with them? Okay, awesome.
Yes, as I was busily typing.
Gotcha.
I will make sure that we put the link to the Replit. We will include the deck, and I will get the links to those sites in the follow-up email that will also have a recording of this session.
Yeah. Other than that, let me provide you with one other kind of plus information here. Let's see if I can pull it up. If you have any questions about the program that weren't answered here today, I'm sure Catherine can kind of help follow up with those. If you want to ask me any questions about development, you can reach me on my LinkedIn. Let's see if I can even reach that LinkedIn's information. And you can kind of ask me like what resources I have used, and you can go ahead and add me on there. Please do mention that you came to this session. Let me know any comments that you have about how the session went, and hopefully you learned something here today, even if it's just how I was going about debugging.
Okay. Thank you again, Demetrio. Really appreciate that. I think everybody got a lot out of it. And everybody who joined us. If you have any further questions about Flatiron School, I'm dropping the link to schedule a chat with our admissions team. As a reminder, again, you'll receive a copy of tonight's presentation within 3 business days after the event. And if you'd like to see any previous events, you can head to our YouTube channel, and I'm dropping that link in the chat as well. All right. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.
Have a great night.